Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Strong Stoic Podcast. I'm your host, Brandon Tumblin. I've been exploring and pondering the cardinal virtues a bit more as of late, and I've been thinking about what a virtue actually is and how one becomes, quote, quote, virtuous. These are well known to most of you probably: justice, wisdom, courage, and temperance. These are the four cardinal virtues, sometimes called the four Stoic virtues because the Stoics sort of adopted these, but these were actually developed by Aristotle, Plato, and Cicero. They developed these. And certainly I've spoken about these virtues in the past and mentioned things like justice, wisdom, courage, and temperance in the explanation of things, but today we're going to do a deep dive into these virtues. Before I get into that, though, allow me to thank my supporters on Patreon. If you would like to become a patron of mine, consider checking me out at Brandon Tumblin. Big thanks to all the supporters. You get early access to all of the episodes. You get a special personalized gift from myself. And you get to support me, your favorite podcaster. So that's pretty cool. Also, check me out on Telegram. I have a group chat on there, which is the Strong Stoic channel and Strong Stoic channel chat. And that is where we talk about, it's basically a discussion forum. It's a group chat, so to speak, that we get to talk about the podcast ideas and you get to throw in your input. And I love hearing about it. So please check me out on Telegram. And last thing is my articles are on Medium, so you can check me out there. And also check me out. I recently had Chuck Chakrapani on the podcast. He has a Stoic magazine called The Stoic Gym, very popular Stoic magazine, and I'm actually starting to contribute to that. So check out my articles there. That magazine is completely free. So now my blog posts are on Medium, but also at The Stoic Gym. Check that out at thestoicgym.com. Okay, what are virtues? Let's see if we can define these. Virtue has a bit of a weird word, right? And I described it recently as character, good character. But what about virtues in and of themselves? How can you think about things like justice, wisdom, courage, and temperance? Well, virtues are essentially ways to act that allow you to live a virtuous life. So in Stoicism, virtue is the only good, meaning living a virtuous life is the only good, and that is the only thing that can make you happy. And maybe happy isn't the best word, but perhaps eudaimonia, which is a crazy Greek word, but maybe something more like flourishing is what you hear it described today, or as I like to say, a state of meaning, where you have a lot of meaning in your life. That is what being virtuous does if you take the Stoic approach. And I've actually found, though, the best way to think about virtues, because they're sort of hard to conceptualize, isn't it? You think about things like how do you apply justice or courage into your life? And really, it's action. It's through action. So the best way to think about these virtues are actually as habits. That is, a virtuous person has virtuous habits. And it is through these habits that they act and hence are virtuous. So let's go through an example here. Let's say that you've previously struggled with road rage, or maybe you do struggle with road rage. If you want to overcome that anger that you get when you have road rage, you need to start a new habit. And what does that habit look like? Well, it's something like, whenever I catch myself getting angry or freaking out about traffic, I need to take a few deep breaths. I need to change my perspective. Perhaps I think about memento mori, everyone's going to die someday, myself included, so why the hell am I getting freaked out about traffic? Maybe you think about how lovely it is to have a car with air conditioning and how nice that is. You don't have to be out in the scalding sun, or that you have beautiful music with you that you can listen to, all the privileges that you have at the moment. The point is that however you find the best technique to calm yourself down, you need to do that enough times to the point where it starts to become a habit. So every time that you are in traffic and you start to feel yourself get a little angry, your habit kicks in, and then you say, okay, memento mori, I'm going to die someday. And then you go through that whole thought process, whatever thought process allows you to calm down and basically not freak out at stupid things. So if you do that enough times, you start to form a habit. The person who has overcome road rage has done so because they've trained their minds into the habit of tempering this rage that they get, and replacing it with something else. So if we think about virtues as habits, then what we find is that we get to become more virtuous over time if we simply practice virtue. Now, habits are very hard to form. And they're even harder to unform, deform. Once you've formed a habit, it's very hard to stop, which is why you have to be very attentive to the bad habits that you're picking up. In fact, it's nearly impossible. The modern research on habits and how they are formed, it's nearly impossible to unlearn a habit. The only real way to overcome a bad habit is by replacing it with something else. So again, if you have road rage and the habit is to get angry over road rage, which anger in that form is a vice, then you need to replace that habit with something else, that other habit being, deep breath, memento mori, and all that stuff that allows you to calm down. Now, here's another quick example about this. Telling the truth to people you love. You see, when maybe you start dating someone, or maybe when you're younger, you're a young teenager, and you're just getting into the dating world, no judgment here, but it can be hard at times when you're first getting in relationships to tell people the truth. You don't know how they're going to react to it. You don't know, maybe perhaps you don't even know the truth, but you're worried about what they're going to say or do if you tell them the hard truth, which could be anything, which is very difficult. Maybe they cook you some terrible spaghetti and you have to tell them, listen, that spaghetti is not that great, but I still love you, but the spaghetti's not great, so maybe we can find a different recipe, something like that. These truths, they seem small, but they're really not, because if you tell your spouse that you love the spaghetti, then they're going to go on cooking that same spaghetti, and you're going to have that terrible meal a lot throughout your whole life. Whereas if you tell them the hard truth now, yeah, it's going to be hard, and maybe they're going to be a little embarrassed, but you can work through that, and then at the end of the day, you can go forward with a better tasting spaghetti recipe. So the point is that this example of telling the truth to your spouse, it's sort of a habit that you have to get into doing. So every time you're faced with such a situation, you have to get into the habit of telling them the truth, and it becomes easier, and you're like the habit takes over, and you don't even think about it anymore. So you're able to be courageous and speak truth regularly. Hence, you are virtuous. But it's not enough to just do the action. Aristotle actually thought that you had to also feel good about that action. That is, if you do a good act, you have to have the proper inner disposition about it. Now, this might sound obvious, right? Of course, you're going to feel good if you do something good, but it's actually not, because I'm sure if you look deep, if you really think about your past, you'll find situations where you've done something good, but you actually don't feel good about it. Like, what about if you're a popular teenager and you and your friends normally treat losers terribly, but you feel kind of bad about it inside? So maybe one day you actually treat, the quote loser, you treat them nicely one day. You might actually feel a little bit guilty about that. Even though it's a good, virtuous act, the peer pressure and the habit that you've created to feeling good about treating people bad, you might actually feel a little bit guilty about treating someone nice like that. Therefore, virtue is developing habits and also feeling good about those habits. It's not enough to just do something good. You have to do it, and you have to do something good and feel good about it. Now, finally, the cardinal virtues. So there's all kinds of virtues, right? There's moral virtues, there's intellectual virtues, there's theological virtues, but the cardinal virtues, which are the virtues of Stoicism, they are virtues that other virtues hinge upon. For example, truth is a virtue, but it's not a cardinal virtue. And the reason is because truth must be guided with wisdom. Should you tell the truth if someone asks you for your bank PIN number? Of course not. That would be stupid. So truth is not always good. It's good in certain contexts. For example, communicating properly with your spouse what you like and do not like. But it's not always good, because if you're going to commit yourself to truth, well, just post your bank PIN online, right? Spread the truth. Therefore, cardinal virtues, that cardinal word meaning hinge, other virtues depend on that. These virtues are always good, and other virtues hinge upon these. Now, another way to think about these cardinal virtues, or as moral virtues, but the biggest point I want you to understand is that cardinal virtues are the purest moral virtues, and other virtues such as generosity and truth, they are important, they are virtues, but they hinge upon these other ones. So let's get into the specifics. Wisdom. I'm sure you've heard about this virtue, commonly called prudence as well. Now, you might also hear this called practical wisdom, which is a great word to describe it as well, wisdom or prudence as practical wisdom. Now, this cardinal virtue, it's actually an intellectual virtue, but it's also a moral virtue. In fact, the line between moral virtues and intellectual virtues isn't so clear, but meaning wisdom is of the mind. It's an intellectual virtue, but it's a moral one as well. So wisdom is basically, to put it as simply as we can, knowing what to do when to do it, and how to do it. And it's also knowing thyself, your loved ones, the world, human nature. It covers everything you need to know in order to act virtuously. Another great way to put it is that wisdom is perceiving the situation that you have to deal with correctly, seeing it for what it really is, not what your subjective experience tells you it is, but what it objectively is, and understanding what is required of you in that particular situation. That's a great way of thinking about wisdom or prudence. Now, this includes helping us to understand what the other virtues require of us. Now, this is interesting because, as much as we want to separate and segregate the cardinal virtues, justice, wisdom, courage, temperance, they are really so integrated to the point where it's hard to talk about them individually. It's hard to talk about wisdom without talking about temperance or talking about justice or talking about courage because they're so intertwined. In fact, Plato thought that all the virtues were so connected and so integrated within each other that a person who has one of the cardinal virtues has them all. You couldn't just have wisdom without having all of the other ones. You couldn't just be courageous without having all the other ones. And so even though we tend to segregate them to help us understand it better, they're really so connected, and that integration is really worth appreciating. But wisdom also shapes how we should feel. As mentioned earlier about the virtues, it's not enough to just be wise and act wisely and to know what you should do and to know yourself and your strengths and your weaknesses. That's not enough. You need to feel good about that. Now, next virtue, temperance. Temperance, also known as moderation. If we could say that wisdom is the intellectual virtue, the quote virtue of the mind, perhaps, temperance is the virtue of the bodily appetites and desires. It's a simple way of putting it, and quite modern way of putting it actually, is all things in moderation, everything in moderation. For example, don't eat too much, don't drink too much alcohol, or don't have too much sex. Likewise, don't eat too little food. Don't avoid social events completely or intimate relationships. And so it's not just moderation, temperance isn't just about restraining yourself from overconsumption, but also underconsumption. So, you might say, a Stoic, some people have this idea of Stoics where they temper themselves from everything. Can't go eating brownies or can't go eating nice food or anything like that. It's not actually true. There's a balance act. It's something that is intemperate is also something that you're getting too little of. I mean, if you're not eating enough food or drinking enough food, that is not temperate. Now, these are bodily pleasures and endless desires, meaning you can eat, particularly junk food. I mean, obviously you get full eventually, but the point is that if you eat, let's say, junk food every night, there's no end to that desire. You're going to keep craving it, keep craving it. The more you get, the more you want. But again, the other extreme isn't necessarily good either. It's kind of like desire for money. Like money, you can, if you get $1,000, you want 2,000. If you get 2,000, you want 20,000. If you want 20,000, you want 500,000. How much money you want just grows exponentially because no matter how much you get, you just want more. At the same time, you need some money. And it's not that you should avoid money. It's a preferred indifferent. It's just that you cannot go after it directly. And you have to understand that the desire for more money, it's an endless desire. You just keep wanting more. And so at some point along the spectrum of acquiring money, you have to accept that, you know what? No more money is going to make me any happier. And there's actually good statistical research on this where if you make any more than $60,000 US for a family of 4, so that's divided between 4 people, there's no increase in happiness. So we actually have evidence to support this. There is a certain requirement to meet your bodily needs and to, you have to eat enough food, drink enough water, you have to have a place to stay, but over that doesn't actually make you any more happy. Now, one of the things you might have picked up on so far in talking about temperance, moderation, is it's quite generic, right? And the reason is because what is a good balance for you is very individualistic to who you are. Temperance can refer to many things. It can refer to moderation in social interactions, for example. Normally most people find themselves somewhere in between introverted and extroverted. You can't spend too much time alone if you're an introvert because you'll go crazy. That's well documented too. You can't spend 100% of your time alone. Most human beings need social interaction. But you also can't spend too much time socializing because you'll never get any work done. How much time do you need alone / with people? Well, this is the thing. It depends. My balance is not the same as your balance, and your balance is not the same as someone else's. Extroverts tend to need more time with people. Introverts tend to need more time alone. And this is one of the parts of live according to nature and Stoicism. It's your personal nature. So the point I'm trying to make with this is that temperance is a very generic virtue, and it's sort of a midpoint between two extremes, alone all the time versus with people all the time in the case of introversion and extroversion, and that there's a balance somewhere in the middle there that is good and optimal for you as an individual. So it's somewhere there, but where that exactly is depends on you. It's probably not 50%. It could be 50%, but it's not 50% for every single person. Now remember, it's a virtue, again, so it matters how you feel about this balance. It matters how you feel about not over-consuming. If you are restricting, say, not eating too much ice cream, and now you're feeling terrible about that, well, that's not actually virtuous. You have to work on feeling good about it. And this stuff just takes time. Again, it's a force of habit. You have to do it over and over and over again. Now, here's a great positive way to think about temperance, because, again, you might think of temperance as not as restricting or restraining or removing things in life like food and wine, but it's rather about having a positive appreciation for it. If you drink whiskey every day, you don't appreciate it. But if you temper it, if you have it, let's say, one day on the weekends, you're actually going to enjoy it. And so temperance is more so about enjoying the things that you have, but understanding that if you keep going after it, you're not going to be happy, and it's not going to actually make you happy. So you distance yourself from it so that you can enjoy it more. All right, number 3 here. Courage or fortitude. This is one of my favorites because this is where strength comes from. The show is called the Strong Stoic Podcast, but it doesn't really need to be the Strong Stoic per se. Of course, strength for me means fortitude of the mind, like the Stoics talked about, but also physical strength. I'm a strength athlete and a coach. But courage is perfecting how you deal with the emotion of fear. Now, just some quick words on fear. Fear is not a bad thing. Fear is intrinsically good, actually, because it can save your life. And it was actually designed by nature to do so. Fear is designed as part of your fight or flight situation where you either, what are you going to do? You're going to stand here and fight the bear, or you're going to flee. So fear is built into that to help you calculate what you should do in situations like that, survival situations. However, we can be overcome by fear to the point where we are unable to act. But we can also not have any fear and act unwisely. Like, there are absolutely irrational fears, but there's also times where, you need a little bit of fear. Being afraid of mustard or pickles is probably irrational unless you're allergic to it. So, maybe you shouldn't be afraid of pickles and mustard. Maybe you should work on addressing that. But if the fear is too much, again, it's not good. You may think of fear as a threat to one's life, right? And that gets back to the fight or flight thing where it's in a survival situation. But we can view fear and courage as something more broadly as any threat to one's well-being or any threat to one's state of flourishing. Hence, anything that impedes your way to eudaimonia, the state of flourishing that the Stoics talked about. I'm going to give you this quote from Aristotle. And I quote, "Whoever stands firm against the right things and fears the right things for the right end, in the right way, at the right time, and is correspondingly confident is the brave person. For the brave person's actions and feelings accord with what something is worth and follow what right reason prescribes." Now, courage needs to be restrained by wisdom. Again, getting back to the integration of all these virtues. Running into heavy machine gun fire is not courageous. It's foolish. It's a medium. Courage is a medium between two extremes. So it's also tempered. Again, it's really hard to talk about these virtues individually because they're so integrated. Now, finally, we arrive at justice. Justice, like the others, has a unique component. The other virtues are focused on individuals, while justice is focused on the world, society, and others. Justice is the quote-quote social virtue and is required because we are mammals who live together in society. Again, it's very, very rare that we have lone wolves who don't want to live as part of human society. They exist, but they're very, very, very rare. The scope of justice is massive. Consider all the laws of a country like the US, for example. You got fair wages, you got fair taxes, you got freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom to protest, retribution for things like murder and stealing and all that stuff. Justice is a massive, massive scope. And you can also think of justice, though, as the virtue that obligates us to others, and the understanding that other people have a fundamental human value, that shared divinity that we talk about. For example, you can be courageous, quote, quote, courageous, to defend yourself by throwing other people down, right? That's an act of courage, and not in the Stoic sense, but you can think about it. Yeah, it takes a bit of that to throw someone down to save yourself, but it's actually not virtuous because it's not just. It's not just to throw other people down. No. In Stoicism, you have a moral obligation to the world around you to uphold justice. It's not enough to just not do any harm yourself. No, you are called to engage in the world and fight injustice. Now, part of that is doing what is required by you to live in society and the requirements of the state to you. Again, got to pay taxes where you're living, and you got to stop at stop signs when you're driving on the road. But justice is also among people. It's all of your relationships. So it's not just legal. It's also, well, are you lying to your spouse about where you were last night? Because that's not just. No, that's not illegal. It's not illegal to lie to your spouse, but it's still unjust. Here's another example. Not considering how a work decision might affect your colleagues. It's not illegal, but if a work decision that you are making is going to put a very, very significant amount of load on one of your colleagues unjustly, well, that is unjust. And so justice exists not just in the legal realm, but it's this, what would you say, the socialization that's among people. And that's very important. Now, I hope that was a good summary of all the virtues for you. Again, we're getting here at 23 minutes. I'm surprised I did it that short, to be honest. They are complicated, but think of them more as habits. That's the best way to think about virtues. Developing positive habits that lead you to be a better person. Character is embodying those good habits over time, internalizing them to the point where you don't even think about it anymore because it's a habit. Remember, as with anything, perfect practice makes perfect. But you got to be careful what you practice. If you practice vice, you will become viceful. If you practice road rage in traffic, you will do that more. If you practice relaxing, calming down, listening to good music in traffic, you will do that more. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to support me, consider leaving me a rating and review. Check me out on my Patreon, Telegram, Medium, the Stoic Gym, all that good stuff. If you're new here, episodes every Tuesday and Thursday, guest episodes and solo episodes. Not going to bug you anymore. Cheers again. Thanks. Until next time.